You're listening to Boggy Talk, Faith Conversations in the Mud, a resource of Church on Bayshore.
What's hotter than Florida in August? This episode of Boggy Talk.
Ooh, man.
Hey, we hope you're doing well. How you doing, buddy?
It's getting hot in here. I'm not going to finish the lyrics to that song. Not going to finish the lyrics to that song.
Oh, man. And please no pantomime. We're acting it out.
Oh, goodness. All right. Welcome to Boggy Talk.
Hey, yeah. There you go.
Way to start us off, Justin.
That's right.
Actually, it's my fault.
There you go. Man, kids are in school.
They're back.
They're back. They're doing homework already and loving life, let me just tell you.
Yep,
Oh, man.
yep. And man, it's been a busy. I forget how. I always say summer is a different busy, so it's like still busy, but it is not as busy as when school starts. I was wrong.
It's just
Remind
crazy.
me of that next year when I say that.
Because I felt like summer was intense for us, and then now I'm like, oh, here we go. It's so happening.
Much logistics. I mean, I know every family.
Mm-hmm.
But we have 6 kids. You guys have 6 kids. Several different schools, activities.
Yeah.
Church.
Yeah. There's just stuff, and everybody's got to be somewhere and do stuff, and everybody's got different needs and
you
needs
get your
different help.
mani-pedi every Friday.
Right. You know me.
Yeah.
Got to keep those toes looking good.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Never done it, but I hear it's great. Well, anyway.
Now that we've talked about pedicures and Nelly songs,
hands and feet and the body,
nice.
See what we're gonna talk about. Really, just following up this past Sunday's sermon, Ephesians chapter 4.
If we are the body, then why are your eyes crying? Or how's that song go?
Why are your hands reaching? Listen, I hate that song. Not the people who wrote the song, but the song is like, if we are the body, why aren't? I'm like, but they are like this. Maybe your church, but like they are reaching. The hands are serving all the body parts. Anyway, we're talking about being one as Ephesians chapter 4 talks about.
Do people like sing that song like? Because it's like
so I think it came out
of
of
we are the body, then why do we not do are you really like getting into that song?
Like someone should do like a PhD like dissertation on did that song actually start the modern deconstruction movement?
Ooh.
Like because I think it was at a height of popularity of like let's call out everything wrong in the church, which needs to happen if there's wrong. But it was like I don't know. It's just like can you imagine seeing that on Sunday morning, like pointing at people? So
that was like a CCM version of Derek Webb's Wedding Dress song.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, they wouldn't play that one on.
I liked Wedding Dress back in the day.
And then it was like...
Because it's more biblical.
Yeah, I mean, and then Derek Webb...
And it was personal. It's like, I am,
Yes, exactly. It wasn't like,
what Hosea mentions over and over again.
That's right, yes. All right, well, hey, we're following up on Ephesians 4. We're talking about being one, unity, what that means for us as believers to be one. Because, I mean... there is a sentiment among Christians, and we hear this in the church, but you hear it amongst churches about other churches like, hey, we're all together in this, which is true. However, there are distinctions and differences. So if we are one, why aren't we one? So I think we're going to maybe talk about this kind of first.
That was deep.
Yeah,
If we are one, then why aren't we one?
Because one divided by one is
And have
one.
we won?
WON1. Yeah. So we're going to maybe start talking like internally and then moving externally to what it looks like. So, why don't we just start with this past Sunday?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were here on Sunday or you listened, we're in Ephesians chapter 4 and we looked at verse 4 through 6. I'm just going to read that real quick. There is one body and one spirit, just as you are also called in the one hope of your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all, and in all. And I read from the NASB just now, so the slight variation from the ESV. As we talked about, there is one body. So while there are different expressions of that one body through the local church, we are all a part of one body. And there is one Spirit of God, and there is one hope of our calling. And there's one Lord, there's one faith, which means ultimately, like, there's only one way to salvation. There's only one, way that we have relationship with God. And there's one baptism, which means baptism really only means one thing. And then, of course, one God and Father of all. So I think that this is tough because, I think we use this word a lot, and I think some people don't like this word, but it is a reality. It's attention this side of heaven. So maybe I should start saying like things are attention. They are attention this side of heaven because we just don't see clearly. Paul talks about one day I will see full and full, but we don't see clearly, and it's clouded by our sin, and it's clouded by other man's sin and women's sin.
We're all sinners.
Yeah, the reality is we are to be all one, believing the same thing, united in that. That is the picture of heaven. But right now, that's not fully true, and I think that the challenge becomes, okay, what is an essential? You know, I think I've referenced this several times through this series, and will be like the old saying is unity in the essentials, liberty in the non-essentials, charity in all, right? Well, and there's a Latin phrase that actually references that, where that comes from, sorry. That's the challenge. What is an essential and what is a non-essential? And I think because of our global connectedness with the internet, it's becoming harder to make that distinction.
Because everyone's right. You know, we all think we're right. We default to thinking we're right. I think the Holy Spirit really has to teach us over time to default differently.
Yes.
That's a supernatural thing, to be humble and think I may not be right about everything. Secondly, it's a denial of self. You know, it really is, you know, to think that someone else may understand something better than I do. But I want to go back to the essential, the quote you said about the saying you said about the essentials. Let's define that a little bit, because people have different definitions of what's essential. And that essentially is what causes a lot of division.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're defining, at this point, we're defining it.
Exactly.
So I think that needs to be clear. Like, we're not saying that this is absolutely the definition of this.
Right.
Because there's a difference of opinion in what is essentials.
Right. Exactly.
And I think something that is important to understand, like when we think about being a part of a church, is we're at a church usually where, so there's primary issues, secondary issues, and tertiary or third level issues, because a lot of people don't know what tertiary means. I think that primary issues are like, we don't believe you're a Christian if you don't believe these.
Right.
Secondary issues are like, we really probably can't have fellowship together if you don't believe these. And then tertiary issues are probably like, we can be a part of the same church and have a difference of opinion on that.
Right.
So right now what we're doing is we're defining what we would say are those things. So primary issues, and I'll just use Ephesians 4. I mean, that there is ultimately one church, right? Like, and the head is Jesus.
Yeah.
So somebody who believes the head is not Jesus, and who believes, you know, maybe people who have secondary issues are not Christians, like we would have a hard time with that. Like, and that is true of some Catholics, some Protestants. Like, essentially, they're saying, hey, if you don't believe in our systematic theology or our doctrine, then you're not a Christian. It's like, well, no, the gospel is what saves. So you've made secondary issues a primary issue.
Right.
And then I would also say, like, if somebody believes there are many ways to heaven, like, we don't believe you really understand who Jesus is, you know, like, because that's not the teaching of Scripture. If you don't believe the Bible is ultimately the authority, I know there's some, like, we can argue some things about that, but that's another thing. I don't know. What else would you add?
Yeah, I think that's a great start. I think it's easier sometimes to focus on the things that people make essentials that aren't, you know, and I'll use
which I kind of did on
Yeah,
accident.
exactly. Well, it's fine. I think.
But when a non-essential becomes an essential, it's an essential, right?
Exactly.
You've made it an essential.
Exactly. By basically salvation by grace through faith alone, like the word, you know, I think, you know, your view of Scripture is there. I think an easy one to talk about is maybe baptism, and that's in this passage, one baptism, and we would say that, you know, you're baptized in, like, as a symbol of faith. But some people, there are some denominations of Christians that would elevate that to an essential, that baptism is necessary for salvation, which we do not believe is what Scripture says to work.
A clear way to say this is like somebody who practices infant baptism, covenant baptism, you know, we would say is a secondary issue and is an issue that we really can't do church together, because we have this big difference that affects the way we do ministry. But if they believe that is ultimately a symbol of Christ's death for them, then we're not saying it's a primary issue. So we're not saying somebody who believes that is not a Christian.
Right.
Right. But we are saying, what you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, is when somebody then says, well, our way of baptism is the essential issue.
Right.
At that point, it's become a primary, and maybe we don't see salvation the same way.
Because I've heard, people say that you must be baptized to be saved. And that's not right. And, you go to, the issue of infant baptism, and there are denominations that practice that is covenant baptism, or so some would call it. And really, that's not. You said it affects the way we do church, but it doesn't mean that they aren't believers. Of course, it doesn't mean that necessarily, and it just means that we have a different perspective on that. But we could still, as a church, work with a church or partner in an event or some kind of outreach with those. That's not not a break fellowship, or you're not. That's the issue in all of this, especially when we start moving outside the church and working with other churches, is that there are some lines. However, we want to be, charitable, as you said earlier, in those lines.
In all things, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I really believe, that someone who practices infant baptism is wrong. I do. But I'm not saying they don't believe the gospel.
Absolutely.
That's how I would say that. But I believe it's so wrong that it would really be hard to do church together. You know what I mean? But it's not hard to serve the community together. It's not hard to do, to love that person. That's a distinction. We're picking one
And if somebody
issue.
went to that church, you'd be like, yeah, great. Good. There's one thing, this one big thing is something I don't agree with, but that's a healthy church. They're teaching the Bible. They proclaim this, okay.
Yeah. So the essentials are basically, kind of the foundational of we submit. I would say there are things that put us in our place with who God is, who we are, and what it means to be reconciled to Him. Because essentially, if we're getting the essentials wrong, we're playing with people's eternity. You know what I mean? And so and we're flirting with blasphemy. So that is a big heresy. That is a big issue. I'm moving on to the secondary issues. This is probably the challenge. Is how do I maintain a relationship with somebody who I think they're wrong about something that's very important to me. And I would just say we do that all the time. And I mean, you have to understand where the relationship is. We're not saying we're submitting to one another in our understanding the word, there might be moments of that, but ultimately we're not. And I think you just have to, 10 years ago, I probably wanted to argue with everybody. Now I'm look, it is what it is. They're never going to be at my church. They're never, it just.
Yeah.
Now we see changes in that in people's lives, but and I don't get, God's going to reconcile all that. I trust
exactly.
in him.
He's big enough to reconcile those things. Absolutely. And I think kind of maybe a helpful way to frame it is distinctives. There's the essentials and then there's the distinctives. The things that would, there's the things that we essentially agree with, I would just use other churches in our community, but then there's distinctives about our church that are this is where we as a church would affirm, the teachings of Scripture that might differ from there, and so these are distinctive to us. I'll use an example of one that always comes up, and people ask us this sometimes, in Discover about well, what does your church teach about end times? And the Baptist
that
faith
does get asked a lot and explored. Just so you know,
and so the Baptist faith and message, I believe, is pretty generous in accommodating different perspectives on this because it is,
So that would be a tertiary issue.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And then some people want you to affirm what they believe. And ultimately what we have said about this issue and other issues is here's kind of what we're going to teach. And if this one issue is the most important thing to you, it's probably going to become an issue to be a part of this church because we're just not going to focus on that like you want us to.
Yeah, I heard somebody say, I feel like you always have to say this, but I don't like everything that comes out of this guy's mouth, John MacArthur. And we've talked about negatively about kind of his approach to some things here. But he says, they say in their church, or at least did, we have what we teach and we have what we believe. And his point was, this is what we teach as a church. So that's going to be clear. We don't deviate from that as a church. Now, as each of us having the priesthood of the believer, we might have some other more distinct beliefs. like end times, but here's what we're going to teach about end times. Here's what we're going to teach about,
Right.
Whatever. And so I think like that needs to be established. And, in our church, like it is in Baptist churches in general, it is a little more of a Big Ten approach. So like you do have churches that say, hey, we believe Reformed theology. And so that's what we're going to teach. And then you have churches that we don't. And so we're going to teach the opposite of that. We have churches that say, we believe this about eschatology. We're going to teach that, or this, and we're going to teach that. Same about, marriage role, all kinds of things. In the Baptist church, you have a more bigger tent where we might say, hey, there's a little more liberty in these areas as long as you don't like make it a primary issue,
right, exactly.
or make it a secondary issue even. And so I get some people, we have people all the time who come in and say, hey, this is my theological view. What do you guys think about that? And it's like, well, we don't teach that. You'll probably be fine here unless you really want that to be an emphasis. And then there's probably need to find another church.
Right. Yes, we've said that to multiple people.
Yes, we have.
And most people like really appreciate that. Like they're like, "Oh, okay, well, cool." And then I would say by and large, either they're fine with it, or they are fine with it and they stay, or they're like, well, this may not be the best place, and that's the best church for me to be a part of, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I do think in this, like as for a friend, and then for maybe a leader. So like if someone believes, women can be pastors, right? Well, I think not only is it like that issue, but it's like how they got to that issue is a big deal. Because is it that culture is informing them, or did they arrive at that from a biblical, study?
Right.
And I think specifically from a leader, it is important to understand how they got there and where they're going. And teachers are under a stricter judgment. So like,
right.
we need to be a little more like, hey, this is why we believe what we believe. But I would just say ultimately, like, this is Boggy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you just said is an important fact. Like we have to take the time to understand why someone gets to where they are in terms of a belief. Is it just something they've assumed? Is it just something that is informed by culture, or have they dug in deep and landed ultimately through study of the scripture, landed at a different spot? And those are all three pretty different conversations.
They are,
I think.
yes, they are different conversations.
And they take time. So, which we don't love to give. Well, real quickly, what do we do when we're not one?
Yeah. So I would say some questions. First of all, is your desire to be one?
That's good.
I read John 17. I think you have it pulled up, right, on Sunday?
I did.
Yeah. I think we need to really listen to Jesus.
Yeah.
I love this passage because he's praying to the Father for us. Like there's something special about that, right?
Let's see. What verses? Let's see. Yeah, so here's John 17. We'll start in verse 22. The glory that you have given me, I've given to them, that they may be one, even as we are one. I and them, and you and me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them, even as you loved me. Father, I desire that they also, whom you've given me, may be with me where I am, to see my glory that you have given me, because you loved me before the foundation of the world. Oh, righteous Father, even though the world does not know you, I know you, and these know you, that you have sent me. I made known to them your name, and I will continue to make it known, that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. So yeah, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, so you see the unity he's calling us to, and not arbitrary unity, but the unity around the glory of the Father, specifically expressed in sending the Son to show who the Father is.
Yeah. Well, and a few weeks ago on Sunday, you said unity is not uniformity.
Yes.
And I think that's important, and a distinctive of unity is that it doesn't mean that everyone is the same, because God has created us differently. And that ultimately makes us stronger and better, as it does the body. This is in the New Testament too. We're one body, many parts. Everybody has a part. And so that's an important thing to remember too, is that it's not uniformity, and that differences do actually make us stronger.
Yeah. So I would just say, like, that's the number one question, is like that your desire? Is your desire that people are unified around Jesus, period, and the essential of the gospel of salvation and who God is, and learning about him? Secondly, are you divisive in nature because of pride, because you think you know better than others and you've figured it out or you've arrived or whatever reason you want to say? And I think that is important. And I think that what must guide us is, and I said this, even if I have passions and concerns, I must remember that my greatest concern and passion is the person in front of me. Like I think I said it a little differently 2 weeks ago, but that we cannot be divisive people. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean we can't, we ever compromise on the truth. I'm not saying that. Mm-hmm. But I just don't understand why people who have a great love for God would be incredibly divisive. And as I say that, I mean, I see myself in that. Sometimes I just get impatient and frustrated and, I'm just asking Jesus to give me his heart and his words in those moments of communication.
Yeah. And it comes back to just trusting him, trusting the process, trusting that he's working. And I think, you mentioned earlier the word tension. There's a tension in all this. And I was just thinking about an exercise, when you exercise, what makes you stronger is tension. Time under tension is what leads to the gains, And I think the
no pain, no gain.
That's
brother.
right. So there is this tension, and the tension that's caused by people having different approaches, different giftings, is that it ultimately does make us stronger because it forces not just leaders, it forces leaders, but it also forces the entire body to do what's going to come later on in Ephesians, submit one to another out of reverence for Christ, to consider each other. And I would say that even as a leader, if someone and we're going in a certain direction, if someone comes to me with a different perspective or a different idea, some leaders would say, well, you're not the leader, so just do what I say.
Right.
But I think what we're striving for as leaders of the church is say, you know what? All right, you're part of this church. Let me listen. And maybe it doesn't change the decision that leadership's made or that a ministry team's made, but it does cause us to consider certain things that might affect the end result. And it's all vital. I think about that in worship ministry all the time, all this means is that, I want to consider everyone where they are and lead them to the Lord, lead them to see how great God is. And it's going to be different. And it doesn't mean I can we can't just take everyone's favorite request every Sunday, but it does mean that as a leader, I've got to be in tune with where the people are. Yeah. And that only happens when you're listening to people. And so that tension ultimately does make us better. That's a
great, those tertiary issues, pastors being more and more willing, leaders being more and more willing to let go of their own preferences is a great model. And there's a lot of scripture about when there is disunity. I mean, how to approach it. And I don't know that the church really is that familiar with it. And there's a lot of instruction on what shepherds should be doing and how they're leading. And, ultimately, I think that we're just trying to live thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, with the realization this isn't heaven yet. I mean, we could talk about so many things related to this. And I would just say, if you have specific issues, you should bring them up. And I if I say something on a Sunday, I'm the primary teacher at our church, that you're I don't agree with, or I have questions about, please reach out to me about that issue. I mean, and thankfully many of you do, and we have meaningful dialogue. And I don't expect if you've believed something for 10 to 15 to 25 years. And I'm showing you a different perspective from the Bible, I don't expect you to just say, well, James said it this way, so I believe it. We may never fully agree on that issue, and that's okay. As long as we are focused on what this church is covenanted to teach, which is according to the Baptist faith and message, and the essentials of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, well, and I would say on that note, if you have questions about what we just talked about, feel free to ask and send it to us, and maybe we can follow up in a coming episode. Speaking of questions, you've got some questions today that you're going to take this part.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to let you answer them all first. Okay.
All of them. All right.
The first is how do we decide which missionaries we support and how much we support them?
Hey, that's a great question. So our missions MLT is tasked with that. So typically we get requests and our priority would be people from our church, like people from this church that are going. So I would say anybody who feels called to the global mission field or even North American mission field from our church, we would discern, hey, what direction, and point them first to the International Mission Board, North American Mission Board, see if that's a fit, because missionaries with them are fully funded through cooperative program giving and this church's giving. So outside of that, we do have those from our church that God has called, and they serve with different organizations. And so our missions team meets with them, vets them. We are doctrinally aligned, and then we have some guidelines, and we're actually discussing those guidelines right now. The MLT is the Missions Ministry Leadership Team, because we believe as God has blessed our church, we want to offer more and more support to those that God calls. So I would say a couple of things. We're evaluating that, and we're working through budget seasons right now, and we are proposing increased budgets of our support for our missionaries, at least, and how it comes all in the end. There's still months to go in this process, but that's the heart of our missions team, and that certainly is the heart of all of our leaders. And so it just comes back to stewardship, like overall, like stewardship of our resources, as all the teams come together, talk about budgets. But you also can give above and beyond to support them directly. And if you want information about that, you can shoot me a message and I will point you in the right direction. And then I would say those outside of our church, we do get requests from people from outside of our church, and we would consider what is the relationship to this person. And then
do we get so many requests?
Yeah, we do. I mean, a lot. We get spam all the time. I would say spam sometime, a good bit. I mean, then we get legitimate requests from people within the church who know somebody.
I meant from outside,
Yeah, and then we consider those. And one, it's based, the first thing is, are we doctrinally aligned for financial support? And then two, and there's different levels of support, would be like a one-time gift or continuing gift, and support, prayer support. And, and beyond that, like, what is the relationship? And then, what's the need? So, and then, an ongoing relationship. So we do have some guidelines for those that we support. It's a relationship. So there's expectations from them, and there's expectations they should have of us as a church. One thing I would say is that our heart is that when we send people from our church to serve in missions, that we are still their church, that the organization they're going with isn't their church. So we want to continue that relationship of support, of prayer, of pouring into them, checking on them, and all the ways that we can support.
All right. Second question is kind of in light of the fact that our deacons this past Sunday served communion, served ice cream, and also explained that they're accepting nominations into their Yoke Fellow or mentoring program right now. So what do deacons do, and how does that differ here from like the traditional role of deacon in the Baptist church?
Well, man, Baptist churches are so diverse in their structure. And it really totally depends on what Baptist church you're talking about and what their deacons do. So what we want to do is look at what the Bible says the deacons do.
That's right.
And so these are people in the church who are servants of the church. When we see, if you go back and read in Acts, when there were the apostles and the needs were overwhelming, and so they commissioned, people to serve with widows. And it was actually a disagreement between the Gentile widows and the Hebrew widows, and there was preferential treatment. So the deacons were called in to help meet those needs. So deacons are servants of the church. They're people of character. Really here at our church, they are servants of the church. They help carry out ministry. Many of our deacons are serving in ministry teams. They're serving in kids ministry. They're helping care for widows, and they're moving and trying to help support more in our foster adoptive ministry. They here at our church, they do function in our church structure as, per se, an MLT, a ministry leadership team, which we have the fellowship team. No, excuse, that's old, man. That was so old. Where did I say fellowship?
Bro, that's so 2020.
That's right. We have the discipleship team, we have the missions team, the outreach team, the stewardship team, the personnel team, and the deacons as well. And so each of those has a. Did I leave them out?
Nope, you didn't.
Each of those has a pastoral liaison, and you are the pastoral liaison for the deacons.
I am.
And so they give guidance, support, feedback, all those things.
Yeah, I mean, simplifying it. Everyone in the church is called to
overcomplicated.
Simplifying it. Everyone in the church is called to serve.
Yes.
And these are men who, at least how we view it, who have a special calling to serve the church really lead through serving. And even right now, the deacons are looking at, okay, this is kind of how we've functioned, but what are the current needs of the church? And maybe we should reorganize how we function to meet the needs, because that's why the deacons started in Acts chapter 6, so that the teaching ministry and prayer would continue. Let's meet the needs that exist. And specifically the overlooked, who aren't naturally being taken care of by the rhythms of the church, because our life groups do a good job of caring for each other.
Absolutely.
But if we're not careful, there's a lot of, like, for foster care and orphans or special needs, and that not everybody gets that. And so the deacons are saying, how can we do that? What do our pastors need, and how can we be there for them? If there's conflict in the church, they would step in and kind of lead the way. And so I'm just hitting widows. I mean, our deacons do a great job of that. That's ultimately it. And, you know, they are one of the voices in kind of the overall direction of the church on a regular basis. So where you might have you might be familiar with the Baptist church who has deacons that function as elders, because it is unhealthy to have one pastor who's making all the decisions. And where every little issue is between him and the church, the whole congregation. So you would have these men in these roles. A lot of Baptist churches don't want lay elders because of a reactionary thing, which is fine. So the deacons just function that way. And that's probably what you're more familiar with.
And I think
my first experience supply preaching was with a deacon who was smoking in the parking lot outside. And then he walked in and he was like, I'm a deacon. I'm like, that's just kind of funny. I don't know. I mean,
we all got those stories. Yeah.
We don't have that.
And I think earlier I said servants of the church. Probably a better way to say that is servants in the church, like they serve the church, you know, because that servants of it makes it sound like the church is saying, do this, no, they're just helping carry out the ministry. Yeah.
We have one more question, but I don't know if we have time.
All right.
What do you think?
Why don't we save it?
Let's save it
for next week, because it's a good question, and I don't think it'll be short.
No, it won't be short. It could be the whole topic.
It could be the whole topic.
Let's do it. Okay. The game.
Oh.
So it's getting hot in here.
It's
been hot in here.
It's been hot.
It actually feels kind of good in the Boggy Talk studios because we're down in the basement.
That's right, in the underground.
Yeah, under the Boggy Bayou. So I'm going to do a quiz about heat. To see how much you know about heat and inform people.
Dude, science was a long
about
time ago.
Heat. First thing is, what city has an NBA basketball team called the Heat?
Miami.
Good job.
I know that.
Well, yeah. Who's their best player?
Jimmy Butler.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hey.
Who's another player on their team?
No one knows another player.
Yes, they do. Bam, out of Bayou.
Oh, there you go.
Come on, man.
I don't know. I know Jimmy Butler. Because we were cheering for the Heat in the finals.
Yeah. Jimmy Buckets. Okay.
Yeah.
In a typical year, around this many
I think
people,
you're really surprised that I knew Jimmy Butler.
I did. I was. Around this many people die from extreme heat in America.
Whoo! This many people die from extreme heat in America. I'm going to go with 2,500.
600.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
you know, maybe this year's going to be 2,500.
Think about it, 600 people are just dying
just
of how
it's
hot it is.
Yeah, that is crazy.
I remember when I was a kid, we went to Minnesota to visit my family. It was the only time I've ever been to Minnesota that I can remember. And it was like 105
Isn't
degrees.
that crazy?
And people were dying.
Yeah.
Like,
because
they didn't have
air
AC.
conditioning.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm not that old. It sounds like I'm like.
It's like people in South Florida don't have heaters. Like, it's like they don't have AC up there. Yeah.
And iguanas die.
Yeah.
Or fall. They don't
happens.
die. They stay alive. They freeze and then they come back to life.
What if we did that?
That happens in Baptist churches with people sometimes. Like,
they sometimes sit on the front
they're
row.
frozen, and then all of a sudden, something, and they come alive. Anyway.
Hadn't heard from you in 20 years, but all of a sudden.
Who sweats more, men or women?
Men.
How do you know?
Because we're always sweaty.
Yeah, we're stinky. We're nasty.
Smell.
We're nasty.
Yeah. I think probably our internal temperatures may be warmer too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. How many sweat glands do you have in your body?
1 million.
Around 4 million.
Whoa! Hey, I was in the right, comma.
Yes, I know. And middle
crazy.
school
4
boys,
million.
they're all reeking.
Do they?
They're reeking all 4 million glands.
Is that when they're like? Do they grow? Do you just get more when you're in middle school, or is it just because like your body's grown so you get more, or they just are? We're always there. Now they're activated. How does that work?
That's the extent of my knowledge.
I need an anatomy
That's
person
the extent
to
of
explain
my
that.
knowledge. Okay. How do you treat heat exhaustion?
You go to a cool place.
Yes. Yes.
I was like, you go to a cool place, cool rag on your head, try to bring the internal temperature down. That's the first thing is you try to cool off. And then...
Yeah, you drink lots of water.
I'm about to say drink water.
Okay. Very good, man.
But if you sweat a lot, you need to drink some electrolytes in that because you don't want to get water poisoning.
Man, look at you.
That's real.
You are very impressive in what you're saying there. Okay. All
right, bring it.
Sorry, that question's stupid. That question's stupid. I'm not going to ask that question. Okay. How many people, what percentage of people
okay,
have a health condition that causes excessive sweating?
A health condition that causes excessive sweating. Like living in Florida doesn't count as a health.
Yes, it doesn't.
Okay.
It doesn't.
5.
4.8. Wow.
Hey, round up to 5. There we go.
Wow.
There we go. I was just thinking like,
Did I tell you we were doing this quiz and you just looked up?
You didn't. Well, you said something about we were going to make it about heat, but because it's been hot, but I didn't.
And so you looked up what NBA team is in Miami.
Not had time to look up anything extra.
The highest temperature ever recorded in the shade was what?
In the shade.
Mm-hmm.
There's like not shade in the desert, so it can't be like a desert temperature. Maybe the shade of a cactus tree. I'm going to go with 121.
136 degrees Fahrenheit.
See, I was going to say 130 something.
In what country do you think?
I'm going to go with United States in Death Valley.
No, Libya.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes way more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. According to NASA, which I don't believe we're even on the moon.
According to science, do we believe in science?
When the temperature reaches 95 degrees Fahrenheit, humans' work output drops by what percent? So we're literally not even people inside, right? Like our productivity as a society drops by this percentage.
Oh, I believe it because I've been so tired the past few weeks. It drops by 34%.
45%.
Wow. Thanks a lot, global warming.
Okay. What vegetable or fruit do you say as cool as a blank?
Cool as a cucumber.
Yes. Why?
Because they are cool. Because they have so much water in them, they are usually cooler than room temperature.
How much cooler?
Oh, wow. I feel like this is like, you got that right. So now,
it is. You're doing so good.
Cucumbers would be... 15 degrees cooler than room
20. You're pretty right,
okay,
man.
Okay, 20. I'm just totally,
Okay. What's the average temperature on Mars then? I only know it in Celsius.
The average temperature in Mars, okay, it's got to be like 5 degrees Celsius.
Negative 63 degrees.
Negative. Well, it's like, Celsius. I always thought, didn't they find water on Mars? Well,
yeah, but that's according to NASA, so I don't know if we can believe that or not.
Do we believe them and all their science?
No. Yeah. What could cause you to feel the most heat as a worship leader? When you introduce a new song in a traditional service.
When people are like, can you sing Breakfast in Hell? No, just kidding.
What do they serve in hell?
Yeah. What can bring the most heat as a worship leader? Yeah. People's opinions presented as fact.
Yeah.
That's
how hot is it in hell?
Yeah.
Tim Keller has a great quote for that because people are like, it's not really on fire in hell. And he says, you know what? He said, fire could be metaphorical for something infinitely worse than fire.
Woo! Yeah. That's gotta be. That's very sobering, man.
Yeah.
Well,
that's why we need Jesus.
Man, and praise.
We deserve that, right?
Praise him. Man, we need Jesus.
That is the essential, right?
That is. I mean, you can't deviate from that.
No, you can't.
We need Jesus more than
we need to talk about it a lot.
And more than we even know we need Jesus.
You think it's an essential that the church talks about it a lot?
Absolutely, because otherwise we're just leading people to make better choices or get cleaned up.
This is bonus.
Yeah,
this is bonus, Boggy.
But it's just like if I tell my kid, speaking of middle scores and sweat glands,
our work percentage is dropping by 45%.
That's right, but
productivity.
It's just like when you're sweaty, putting on more deodorant. Like
you
tell someone having a heat stroke, you should wear more deodorant.
Preach,
you're having a heat stroke, but you smell. Let's fix your smell before I take. That's what it's like. We got to get to the root of the issue, and you were just I remember so distinctly. Like it's an illustration. It's like putting lipstick on a pig, hear that. And then when I was in Korea, a speaker at the chapel at the school, like in the markets there, you could actually like buy a pig's head, and they brought in a pig's head and put lipstick on it.
Man, that's memorable.
But it really is.
I should do that one Sunday.
People would walk out.
They would.
Absolutely. You could do that when you're teaching middle schoolers. They may get grossed out, but they would think it's cool enough to stay. Yeah. But it's just, if we aren't talking about Jesus, what are we talking about? And we can't assume, this is really, I think especially now, like in 2023, we can't assume that there's an understanding of who Jesus is.
They don't know the gospel, man. People walking around Niceville don't get it.
Yeah, they just
not everybody. I didn't
every single person. No, but it's assumed that people have a baseline knowledge of who Jesus is, and it's just not. They may know the name, and they may not even know the name, but they may know the name. But then their association of what Jesus is conflated by so many things that have influenced them, or the absence of things that should have influenced them to know who He is, and so we're kind of at this, we really do have to help non-believers, I think, at this point, almost deconstruct who their view of Jesus is and see what the Bible teaches Jesus is and who He is. And if we're not talking about Jesus, what are we doing? On
Good
that
job,
note,
Justin.
There's a boggy note.
I'm not saying anything else.
That's an essential.
It would just be dumb. Yeah, some dumb joke.
That's right. So, hey, but seriously, if you have questions, we want them. They help us, and they make us better because you may be asking a question that other people are thinking, and you may ask a question that we're like, oh yeah, we actually hadn't thought of that.
Or it might be dumb, and you make us better at how to answer dumb questions. But either way,
all of the above makes us stronger. And speaking of stronger, you're stronger because you listen to Boggy Talk.
Maybe that's debatable.
Or you could have
that's a tertiary issue.
Or we could have slowed your workout.
This is like a 7th level issue.
That's right. Hey, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Boggy Talk. We are so glad you joined in the conversation. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a beat.